Hi guys, welcome back. Eric's UK here with a continuation of my games I've played series. Today continuing off my last video with regards to Warhammer 40k. And today I will be focusing on editions 3rd, 4th and 5th, as they pretty much blur together as one edition really. As you know from watching the last vid, I pretty much skipped 2nd edition, thankfully. And I came back towards the end of 3rd when a friend of mine, Mooney, decided that he wanted to play it and asked if I would be interested, at which point I said yes, absolutely. He wanted to go Chaos Space Marines, Black Legion specifically, and I wasn't really sure. So we went over to our nearest Games Workshop store, which was Cambridge, and we together bought the 3rd edition rulebook, although I ended up keeping it for some reason. He bought the Chaos Space Marine Codex and a few models, and I just bought a new army codex for Tau Empire, which I'd never heard of. This faction didn't exist during 1st edition or 2nd, I think they came out during 3rd. And I didn't buy any models, I just bought the book because I wanted to see whether I liked it first, and quite frankly I didn't. I think as an army they're not especially interesting to me, although I have tried playing them in later editions anyway. And I pretty much sold the Tau Codex shortly after and went back to my old favourite, the Space Marines. I remember that Mooney started converting some models. This was back in the day when Chaos was all about mutation, and there was some, even from Rogue Trader times, there was some absolutely gorgeous mutation sprues and things, and you had models that were like, had like the bodies of slug things and extended arms and tentacles growing out of their faces and stuff like this. And Chaos was a lot more interesting and thematic back then than it is now. And I remember actually he made this really cool conversion. He wasn't prepared to pay out for a metal Chaos Dreadnought, so he bought a Loyalist plastic one and used some of the sprue pieces from the Chaos Marine box. And I don't know if you've seen, if you're not a Warhammer 40k bod, you probably don't know it, but Dreadnoughts are basically big metal walking things with like half dead pilots in them kept alive to continue fighting. Very grotesque and all this sort of thing. And he cut a hole in like the chest plate, and there was a mutation sprue that had like a screaming head on the end of like an S-shaped serpentine neck, and he had that growing out of this hole in the front of the sarcophagus, the pilot having been mutated even in sort of like stasis. And it was an awesome model. I ended up going Space Marines. I created my own chapter called the Sons of Osiris, and I had this whole sort of Stargate-y style backstory that I came up with for the fun of it, of them finding a planet of like a Talan sort of Arabic style human culture, and at the centre of this vast desert with this strange buried alien pyramid sort of subterranean structure, which the chapter took over and used as their base of operations. All fairly meh, and at the time Games Workshop did this awesome weird sort of reddish purple colour paint called Fire Dragon Crimson, which I did mine in. They looked absolutely gorgeous in it, and then a few years later they stopped doing it, and it's just like, oh. Mooney decided to stop bothering after a while. We didn't even get a game in really, and without anyone else to play, certainly not, I ended up selling the models off. 3rd edition rules wise was a big step up from what I was used to. This was where the game sort of became the classic and most well-known version of the rules. Everything that would survive for the next 15 years or so came out of 3rd edition. They'd lost like the silly stats, the things like cool and willpower, and they sort of boiled it down to a more simple stat line, more simple rules system. If you remember, I was saying Rogue Trader was horrendously complicated. Well, this was a lot better, much simpler, easy enough to get your head around. Gone were the days of the weird 2000 AD styly universe and art. Now they had started putting the real building blocks of their universe into place, and it was much more like what we have now. So we only had a couple of very small skirmish, couple of units in a KHQ sort of game, but it was enough to sort of like rekindle that interest that I had. But it wasn't until probably somewhere around about 2005 that it really came back. Our local game store at the time, a number of people were interested in starting 40k, and the owner had said, well, if there's going to be people buying it, I'll order it in. And I said, well, I'll run the club. I was already running games and tournaments and things for the store anyway, so running a war games club would be, easy peasy. So 4th edition, all bought into that, and we probably ended up with about 8, 9, 10 people interested. Mix of armies, mix of player ability. I fell back on Space Marines. Initially I started with a chapter called Silver Skulls, which I remember very differently from Rogue Trader. I remember the artwork, and I remember something about them being headhunters, collecting skulls and stuff, but they seem to have changed that, and they ended up being more like prognosticators. They use their librarians, their psychers, to divine whether something is worth their effort, and then they use that as the went back to trying something like Ultramarines, didn't really get interested in that, and I kept cycling through what I wanted, and nothing worked. And quite frankly, although people like to go on about how good Space Marines are, Space Marines were terrible in 4th edition. 4th edition had some real, I say 4th and 5th. 4th especially, I think, had some real problems. And some of these problems were evened out over 4th to, from like 5th to 6th. Some of them lasted right up until the end of 7th. And primarily the problems were, in 4th, it was possible to have units outflank, which means they come in off the side of the table. You had to roll to see which side it was, or whether you got to choose a side, but they can come on the sides of the table. Okay, so there are certain units, Gene Stealers being the main one, which are a close combat unit for the Tyranid high fleets, that are absolutely batshit crazy in combat. They could outflank, and they basically tear through, or under that sort of edition, could tear through Space Marines like no one's business. And in 4th edition, Space Marines played in what's called a gun line, which basically means they never really went forwards. They kind of hunkered down and they gunned you as you went for objectives, or you came forwards. There was no Overwatch back then, so whenever I played against Tyranids, and someone took Gene Stealers, which they always did, they would come in on the table edge, and then they could charge and assault you before you got to do anything, and you'd lose half a squad or a whole squad, and you might gun down a couple more because they had invulnerable saves and they didn't worry about the armor penetrations or armor modifiers, and then they'd be into the next unit, and pretty much you gave up. Marines were not very good. The other problem they have during most of the what I call now the classic era, the 2000s, was that how armor saves were. You had an armor save. Marines generally had the best. Terminators had like a 2-up, but normal Marines were a 3-up. Chaos Marines were a 3-up. Most people were like 5 or 6, really. They weren't expecting to pass armor saves. They were expecting to die. That's why they had so many of them. But everybody and their mum took weapons that were basically what we called AP3, which basically meant if you were an armor save of 3 or worse, you didn't get an armor save. And when you start paying, when your Marines are inbuilt with the cost of a 3-up armor save, but you're never allowed to have a 3-up armor save because everybody takes melter weapons, plasma weapons, las cannons, Marines were hard done by, very hard done by. So 4th wasn't a great addition. It was also the time that Forge World models really took off. Forge World is a subsidiary company, I guess you'd call it, and they make resin model kits for things that Games Workshop don't. They also expanded the units that you could have. They did a series of books called Imperial Armour, which were ridiculous. They were like 50 quid a book. I've got some of the original ones. I think, let me see. I've got the first 7. Now, if you think that's like 350 quid's worth of books, and these were kind of like, if you're aware of them, like the Jane's Weapons of the World sort of thing. It's all like almost like catalogues of all the various war machines you could get. They're ridiculously expensive. Forge World are still ridiculously expensive for resin kits. And when they were doing the rules for them in these books, they were horrendously undercosted and overpowered. To the point that people wanted to play Forge World because they were so good, but no one wanted to play against them. And there was whole things where people would say, no, if you're playing Forge World, I'm not touching it. But we had a lot of fun under 4th edition. A lot of fun with the game. And I think there must be something to it, otherwise people would have drifted off and what have you, and moved on to other things. But 4th, I ran a number of leagues, campaigns, map-based campaigns, and that were amazingly popular. It was good. 5th edition came along. I want to say about 10 years ago now. And 5th edition tidied up a lot of the rules. They fixed a lot of things. The basic mechanic of the game was still there. And I don't know, it's hard to explain, and after all this time I don't think I could probably do it justice, but they fixed things just enough that the game became a bit more balanced. And 5th, I think, was quite popular. I don't think it was popular with the people who felt their army suddenly lost out, but for the most part 5th edition was really, really good. Who was I playing at 5th? 5th edition, I created my own chapter. I found, they don't do it now, but they did a really cool kind of whitey blue called Ice Blue, and I painted up a marine with it to see, and I loved the look of it. Ice blue with white trim and whatnot, and I called them the Knights of the Void. And the idea was, and I still sort of stick with this now, the idea that Space Marines were always meant to be the fantasy knights transported into space, or like a monastic brotherhood, sort of Templars or whatever. And I kind of made them a little bit around Arthurian lore, I guess. And whenever I sort of mention this on various forums, there used to be it's still there, but there's a forum called Bolter and Chainsword, which is kind of dedicated to what they call MEQs, Marine equivalents. So Loyalist Marines, Chaos Marines, Grey Knights, that sort of thing. And it was a really good resource for playing Marines. The problem was that they didn't like it if you didn't kind of toe the party line where lore was concerned. You started mentioning that you have female Space Marines, you'd get not abused, but you'd soon know that they felt you were in the wrong. And I got quite a bit of grumbliness off people because I was too according to them, I was stepping slightly too off the set path of the lore by having sort of like this knightly Arthurian approach to Marines. Marines aren't like that. If you want the knightly sort of thing, you play Black Templars and you do that. So jog on. So I stopped using that. But 5th edition was one that I really liked, and I will probably go so far to say that up until the release of 8th edition, 5th was my favourite. It was a lot of fun. So 3rd, 4th and 5th really do blur together for me. Mechanically, they are essentially the same system. They just slightly tweaked and improved with each one. And I had a great time over sort of like probably about 12 years. No, not even that. Yeah, about 12 years of playing on and off. Bear in mind, I didn't play a lot of third. But it was a good way to get the club going that we currently have. It was a good way to get people together and play. This was a time when we were all a lot younger. And I was in my 30s back then. And, you know, people would text you or ring you and go, you're free such and such night for a 40k game. And, you know, we had a lot of games going back then. So I think that was probably the heyday of our club, and probably the heyday of 40k in general was the 4th, 5th edition block especially. Some good memories. Anyway, I can see this is dragging on a bit, quarter of an hour or so. So thank you for watching if you did so. If you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell. Help me try and grow the channel. If you had any experience with these editions of the game, let me know what you thought. And I'd like to see what your thoughts are on the editions of 3rd, 4th and 5th Warhammer 40k, whether you agree or disagree. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, take care and good gaming.